Hello all, I've created a Blender tutorial for a sauce bottle, with labels, an opening and closing lid, and with shaders and lighting in Eevee, Blender's real-time renderer. If you're new to Blender, this run-through will demonstrate some tools you may not have seen before, or if you're already familiar with Blender, you may see some tools used in an interesting way. So here is what we'll recreate, this tomato ketchup sauce bottle. You can start with the bottle or the lid first. I might go with the lid. After deleting the default objects in my scene, open the Add Object menu and add a circle mesh. Go into edit mode with Tab and we can begin editing. So after adding a circle, extrude it out a little, then move it up to make room and extrude down. Give it a subsurf and one blunt bevel with a loop cut and slide it down. Extrude out and then bring it down and under. If I select one vertical edge loop, you can see the lathe shape. Extrude and make some loop cuts close to each other to make the top sharper, then bring it in and down on the inside. One more to bevel the inside bottom. Here, I'll change it to green, in matcap shading mode. To get rid of the blocky surface, set Shade Smooth. And to mimic the lid design, some mesh hackery. Adding a loop cut at the top of where the design starts, extrude each individual face. Pull up just the bottom vertices, and then scale in along the normals to get a nice shape. And another cut to sharpen where it meets the lid at the bottom and the top. Then smooth vertices. Another cut at the top will chill the weird topology up there. Then one more cut with smooth vertices. Apply it a whole bunch as it blends into the top of the lid. Then tuck the verts in and under by scaling on the Z-axis only, flipping them vertically. Once again, select only the indented vertices of this new ring, scale in and up to adjust the strength of the shape. So it ends up with a nice curve sharp mix. Duplicate the bottom ring, move it just a touch below the lid mesh. Separate the new ring into a new object. Extrude it up a touch, and after a bevel loop cut, bring it out and down, then under for the lid base. Select everything but the nozzle in edit mode of both objects, set the 3D cursor at the bottom of the nozzle to help keep it aligned, then set pivot to 3D cursor. Scaling on the X and Y axis only, it doesn't change the height but makes it wider. One quick adjustment, thicken the nozzle cap, then duplicate another ring, switch back to the normal pivot mode, extrude and scale this in for the cap. It has a little bump from the plastic mold, so I'll include that too with a few more rings. If the shading is weird due to the face direction being wrong, Shift N, you can recalculate the normals. Then extrude to bring in the locking seal for the lid to close on. So that looks kinda tight. The idea will be that the lid will move up and twist to open. And while this is up, I can see the lid base to bring in and under the nozzle. Connect the ring to fill it with a face, extrude up once more and inside the nozzle. And I'll move the floor down a little to catch the nozzle when it twists down. Alright, cool. We managed to get a close enough shape that looks nice. It's bottle time. Bring the lid up to make space for the bottle. Duplicate the bottom ring and extrude once, and a few quick loop cuts on the nozzle just to fix the topology. I'll now separate this new bottle mesh to a new object. Change it to a maroon red, and then make a loop cut in the center and another, which is slid right into the middle as well. They'll overlap. Now select the bottom face loop and scale in on the X and Y, which won't change the height. One more bevel loop cut from the top and also from the bottom. Bring the top of the bottle mesh in and under the lid. Now I'll create the indent of the bottle, as you can see in the reference, extruding it from the bottom. Then it comes back out, and a few well-placed rings will get the smooth shape of the bottle. And don't forget to bring the bottom in. Okay, we've got the main shape already. Let's add the mechanism to open and close the bottle lid. First, we're going to add two shape keys. Name key 1, open, and the basis, name closed. Select open from the list to begin editing the mesh in that key, and move the whole nozzle up. Check that it worked with the slider, and now we can control the open close. Now to make the twist open effect, add an armature, and bring the bone tip up. We can use a vertex group for Blender to identify parts of a mesh. In this case, to move the nozzle only, but leave the lid base where it is. Add a new group, rename it lid, and we'll assign it in a moment. Duplicate it and make a bigger bone below for the whole bottle. I'll rename the bottom bone bottle and parent the top bone to it with keep offset. Now when attached, the lid will move with the bottle in pose mode of the armature. And so I'll rename the top bone lid. Bone parent the bottle to the main bone. Parent the lid mesh to the top bone with an armature to form. And now let's assign the selected nozzle vertices to the lid vertex group. Now to make the twist open effect, we want the shape key to move up as it rotates. Switch the top bone to XYZ Euler and lock everything except for the Y rotation. If we right click on the open shape key, we can add a driver, and it'll open the quick driver setup. Change the type to average value. The object to reference is armature, lid bone. Tell it to be driven by the Y rotation of the bone and set to local space. Update dependencies if it doesn't update for you yet. And when you rotate the bone, the shape key opens up the lid, as if unscrewing to open and screwing back down to close. Select the top bone in pose mode and give it a limit rotation. With local space, at min and max 0, it won't move. Hide constraint, and you can rotate again. Now turn it until you think that will be the max opening position. Mark or copy that number, that Y rotation, to set the max rotation limit here in the constraint. Great. And you can turn on viewport shadows to see better. Set the 3D cursor where you want by snapping it to this selected vertex, so it's on the surface. Now it's time for the label. Add a mesh grid. Divisions 4 and size 10 meters. Rotate it to face front and pull it away from the bottle surface on Y-axis. Then bend the shape to fit the bottle sticker. Give it a subsurf, a subdivision smooth, to soften the shape. Okay, the shape's done, but it's hovering away from the bottle. Give it a shrink wrap modifier to wrap it around the bottle. Project mode, target, bottle, and negative on if you need it. Move offset to give it a paper-thin distance from the bottle mesh, and then shade smooth. Offset is important because it avoids intersections from being too close for the rendering to deal with. Alright, now let's add some shaders. Split the window and increase the 3D view focal length for better perspective. Switch to the material window. Shrink wrap project will always attach to the bottle in this direction until it hits nothing. Give the label, the grid mesh, a material. Then give the lid a new material. And I'll split the window again for the image editor. Here I'll open the bottle image for reference, and color picking. Let's now switch to render view mode, and eyedrop the green label color, initially at the top, the darker part of the gradient. We'll be able to yoink these colors for our nodes. Let's add a gradient texture to recreate the label. And to help with this, I'll also add a color ramp. Hit Ctrl T to add an auto shader setup. If this doesn't work, turn on the node wrangler to activate the quick shortcut. And this adds the texture mapping nodes all at once. We'll connect them together and reapply the green that we saved on the shader color initially, and we'll paste that on the left side of the color ramp. And change the color ramp right to the lighter green in the center. Then we can connect the color ramp to the shader color input, replacing our initial color pick. This gradient radiates out from the center. Change the gradient type to spherical. Now we can change the mapping, mostly the X and Y position, and match it up like the reference. And switch the color ramping type here if you need, for a sharper or softer blend. You can also move the color ramp dots closer together. Now this can work, but actually in this case I'll separate the texture coordinates just to save them for later in case I need them, and add a new set, again with the Node Wrangler shortcut. And we can make it easier by adjusting the mapping in 3D. To do this, make it an object type coordinate by connecting the object pin into the mapping. Then add an empty null object. I drop the coordinate node target to the empty, and then place the empty for the green gradient, and you can scale the object to make it bigger. By Control-Shift clicking the shader, you can output from that shader. Tweak the roughness and specular as needed, and you can change the empty's visual size so it doesn't get in the way without actually scaling it, affecting the texture here. Now let's add a new gradient texture, another Node Wrangler set with Ctrl-T, and give it a frame to make things easier to see. We can change the color and give it a label. I'll call this one down here green gradient, and the backup mapping can sit next to it. Hide nodes if you're finished with them for now. For this gradient, it will change between the green and red label areas. So adjust the mapping to rotate. Then, with the color ramp, we can slim the gradient right down. In the color ramp, make one green and one red. But add another color ramp dot. Place it in between the other two that are squished together. It may mix the green and red, giving us yellow by default. But let's make that one blue. Because we won't actually use the color on the texture for this, but rather to separate the areas into the colors, red, green, or blue, for areas 1, 2, and 3, which we can send out as separate channels. So with a separate color node, it creates black and white plates that separate the label for us. And a constant ramp type makes it a completely sharp line. Connect this blue channel output and it shows white for where the black dividing line will go. Now a mixed color node. Make the red channel, the bottom of the label, the factor. The green color we first made goes in slot A, and now output that to C. The default grey in slot B shows the empty slot masking the label. And after adding all of these, I'll readjust the nodes to match the flow. Now duplicate all the nodes in the green gradient frame. I closed the image window before, so I'll bring it back. And it's time to eyedrop some more colors. In this new copy, change the green color ramp to the red part of the label, the center, and then the darker edge. Duplicate the coordinate empty, make it a ring to tell them apart. That copy is called empty001, so switch the red part of the label's object coordinate target to that. And actually, I'll rename the coordinate empties as well. And then you can turn on the name checkbox in the object properties to see them. Okay, so that red one works. You can also scale one way to stretch the gradient, and modify further again with the ramp dots to offset it more on top of the empty position. Okay, that now goes into input B of the color mixer. Let's output that. Great, we have the separation between the green and red part of the label. Okay, let's do some node shuffling again, just to do a bit of housekeeping. And I'll try a few different world backgrounds too. Just pick one that looks nice, and it can help a bit with lighting and shaders. I'll just make the label a little bit shinier. And if you duplicate or add a node, and click confirm over one of the wires, it will connect in between them. Splice it in between the first color mix that we just duplicated and the principled BSDF shader. Can you see what we're about to do? The blue channel from the label separation goes right into that factor. And boom, we've got the label frames ready. Now the branding. Let's start with the name, a text object. I'll type it out in edit mode. And then in the properties, center the alignment to pivot it from the object origin dot. And you can change the font one section up in the properties. I'll add Rowdy Heavy font, and then sheer in the transform properties gives italic. You can also change the spacing of letters or words here. And offset to thin or bolden. Results may vary depending on the font. Okay, that looks close. Now the little wisp on the T, add a new grease pencil stroke. Make it white color. And go into draw mode. Remove the default brush stroke in edit mode. If you were already in draw mode when you tabbed into edit mode, pressing tab again will take you back into draw mode rather than object mode. So now you can begin drawing. You can choose a brush tip up here, so I'll make it a thicker ink type. And here you can turn on smooth stroke. You've got the radius for the smoothing effect, and how much underneath. You can see how the draw lags behind the cursor. Rotate the view like turning the canvas if it's easier to paint with the graphics tablet. It has pen pressure sensitivity for size of the draw line. And the cool thing about Blender's grease pencil, I can simplify the brushstroke vertices. And in the toolbox, increase the steps of this for less points. That just normalizes everything out. Now subdivide all the points, and in that current action toolbox is the smooth factor. From there, now you can edit like mesh vertices. Alt-S will thicken that part of the paint, and turn on proportional editing to smooth the effect. If you want to rotate a part of the paint stroke, change the pivot point to cursor, place it, and then rotate the line from that point for all selected vertices. Also scale to get these brush line tips in the right direction and not overlapping. And that's ready. What we do now is stick the text onto the label and curve it around the bottom. Isolate the text and wisp only, and give it a screenshot. And then I can move these two objects to a new collection to turn on and off easily. Add this new image I just screenshotted in as an image texture. Give it a node wrangler set, and give the label mesh a UV unwrap, matched up to where the text object is, and make the image edge extend to avoid any repeating text. Yet another color mix, and insert it over the wire. That new image texture goes right into input B. Make it an add type. So that's the main text now on the label. We can also add a cool drop shadow. Add a vector math node and add the image mapping into slot A, and another mapping node to slide and offset it from the original. We connect this new mapping combo into a copy of the image texture. The original will be the white text, and this new one will be a black shadow behind it. Oh, and actually we don't need the UV coordinate for the offset mapping, so I can cut that connection. With the UV mapping already defined, it just adds on top. Let's duplicate another color mix node and splice it again just before the shader node. Put this new drop shadow image texture into the B input of this new color mix node. You can see it echo behind by changing the mapping. So to make this duplicate white text into a shadow, add an invert node. Putting that in the middle flips from white to black. Okay, you can start to see the effect, but everything is a bit muted. First, I might just lower the drop shadow offset a little bit. Now, of course, the original image isn't completely black and white, so inverting it makes it grey, but this is no problem. We can add a color ramp to sharpen the shades. Moving them in clips the shades to full black or white. We can then flip them, and we won't even need to worry about the invert node, so we can attach that directly into the color mix. Okay, the shadow is stronger, but the white is now still washed out. I can switch the color mix here to darken. That helps. And with a little bit of node housekeeping again, and this special mapping node that does the offset, I'll frame it and give it a color. Naming it text offset, just so I know for later that's the one to move. I'll frame a few others, like the text shadow nodes. And rather than darken for that drop shadow mix node, I'll try multiply. Now multiply relies on the order of the A-B slots, or the 1 and 2 inputs. So I'll make the shadow input A. Now we still need to pop the washed out white shade of the actual text. Even though we've gotten rid of it around the label, this add color mix node before the multiply one that we just made, it needs a color ramp before it, just like the shadow got. You can see the difference as soon as we move the color ramp dots in towards each other, and some more of the label color comes back too. Now for the trick. Connect this new color ramp for the white text also as the factor into the shadow multiply color mix node. to only display the drop shadow outside of the white text, which mimics the drop shadow behind. And an invert node works fine here if I can't be bothered flipping the color ramp dots. Cool. Right. Next, let's give the bottle and lid some real materials. Switch the 3D viewport to render preview mode, and I'll switch the label material, still selected, to output from the shader node, so you can see the initial green we color picked, and now with everything we just added. I'll switch to material properties, over on the right here, and let's start with the bottle by selecting it. From a standard principled shader added by a new material, bring saturation and hue to 1. This gives us full red, then it comes down to the value level for shade or lightness. So I'll aim for a maroon red, a little more dull than the label red. Play around with the roughness, specular, and specular tint a bit until you like the look. Alright, done. For the lid, I'll assign it the same red bottle material. And to avoid changing the material for both objects at once, click the number 2 for 2 users of that material right now, and make it a single user, duplicating the bottle material with the .001 postfix slapped on the end. I'll rename the material lid. Again, only change the hue and saturation very slightly, then the value finally to lower the lightness of the plastic color. The label will have a little foil type material behind the label sticker, so to give us this slight metallic sheen, increase the metallic level of the label. This will give it a bit more reflection of the darker environment and contrast the shine. Alright, that's done. Keep the label selected and snap cursor to its origin center. Add a text object and bring it down only without moving it left or right. The text will be misaligned, but that can be fixed. Notice the object origin dot is still at the center. Under font alignment, set center, middle. I'll give this one a close match I've found, SF or sci-fi movie poster. The font object can be scaled out and manipulated in most ways as other types in object mode. I'll give it all caps, tomato. We'll duplicate for source, and scale it down under. And one more time, 500 milliliter net. For this one I'll change the font to Helvetica Light. Match that one up underneath again, and the 500ml I'll give a new material. That's going to be a black shade. I don't have a good bold for this one, so here I'll duplicate it and just move it one way a bit to thicken it, wider or taller. For this smaller and thinner text, and with its simpler font compared to the main branding, we can get away with wrapping the text object itself around the bottle, on the label. Add a shrink wrap. Apply it like the label mesh, only now the target will be the label itself. Project mode, which keeps it to one axis and is much cleaner this way. Negative, depending on the direction of your object. And offset to correct for intersection. Select the others, and Ctrl L opens up the link menu. We will copy the modifiers from the active object, the last one you clicked on with the shrink modifier, and apply it to all others selected. Some tweaks. For a sharper label edge, I can choose closest texture filter, but try them all out if you wish. Alright, that's looking all good. Let's add the tomato and top graphics of the label. Add an image reference. I'll add in a tomato photo, and to trace this, add a curved circle. Match it close enough to the tomato, adjust the handles and points to fit the shape. Subdivide or break the handles to give more detail or sharp corners. We'll keep bringing it around, adjust the points and handles just to get the curve to move in the right direction. And the leaves are the hardest part. It's a bit easier around the main tomato. By pressing the V key, you can separate the handles into free mode, where the leaf meets the curve of the tomato. Since it's a sudden change with the tomato behind, I'll give it a vector free type handle and point it in the other direction, and again into the next leaf. I'll continue extruding out each point, just make sure the handles are pointing the right way as it goes to the next. Alright, as it loops back round, Set cyclic to join the curve, and set a fill mode to give it a surface. Like the label gradient, add an empty to be a texture mapping object. Give this new tomato object's material a node wrangler set, coordinate object type with the tomato texture coordinates. Set the tomato image into the image texture, rotate the empty 90 degrees if you need, since the curve object here was previously rotated, just so it matches up with the empty. Then scale and move. Fit the tomato into the shape that was traced. Now to slap it on the bottle, convert to a mesh. A converted curve doesn't give the best topology, so let's make it a nice square grid to curve on the bottle. We'll add a modifier, remesh. Turn on wireframe overlay to see the detail level. Lower the voxel type size, though be careful not to go too low. Hold shift to slow the value change. When the value is low enough and the detail is high enough, apply the modifier to bake it into the mesh. Now a shrink wrap. I drop the label and set to project wrap type. If it weirds out, there's a lot of overlapping vertices from the remesh bake. I'll turn off wireframe overlay. Then in edit mode select all and merge by distant. That should fix it. Delete any odd island vertices that are left, not sticking properly. And change offset to avoid going into the label. Awesome. Another subdivision surface will give professional level smoothness. And you can see the difference. Okay, extras time. Add a circle and shrink wrap it. Then a text object to make the little R logo. Shrink wrap that too. I drop label, project mode, and negative on if you need to. Scale them down together while they stick onto the label. Cool. There's a QR code. Let's start with the square plane. Rotate close enough to the label direction and subdivide. In the toolbox, I can up that to 9 cuts. Select the outside edges, duplicate and bring them out, and we'll hide that for a border later on. To fake the QR code on the inside grid, select that element and search Select Random. Choose Deselect from the current selection randomly. We'll delete those faces, then we'll add a new material, black color and low shine. Bring back the duplicated edges and press F to close that surface. Move it back a bit and give it a unique material. Make this white for the QR background. Scale down to match the reference, and we'll shrink wrap both. Simply give the black QR code a little more offset to be in front. There's also some numbers on top. I just duplicate the R text object, bring that up, and type in the numbers to match on top. And we're almost there. Let's add some final branding graphics. There's some nice fresh looking graphics outside the tomato. Let's create those. Add another curved circle. Give it a fill and a unique material from the label. I'll name the new material Green Drops. Adjust the color ramp for this smaller object. And shrink wrap again to the label I've called Grid. Project mode to use projection. Now I can adjust the curve to match the graphic. Little fresh droplet effects. Duplicate the curve, and it'll keep the shrink wrap. For the other side, scale in one direction to flip the shape, so the droplet will come out from the other side. Cool. There we go. This one is in Eevee. Grab the file to check it out. It was a fun little experiment with nodes and modifiers. Maybe it will inspire some ways you can use these tools for your own projects. Comment or message me with any questions. I'm happy to answer them for you. Happy blending. Peace out.